For 8,000 years, the Aztecs cultivated a grain so nutritionally complete that NASA now studies it for space missions. It contained all 9 essential amino acids, a complete protein rivaling meat. It thrived in heat that would kill wheat. It required no pesticides, no fertilizers, no coddling. A single plant produced up to 100,000 seeds. The Aztec Empire ran on it. Warriors ate it before battle. Children grew strong on it. It was called Huautli, the divine food. Then, in 1519, Spanish conquistadors arrived in Tenochtitlan and saw fields of amaranth stretching to the horizon, crowned with crimson and gold plumes that stood taller than a man. They watched Aztec priests mix the grain with honey and agave, forming it into sculptures of their gods, Huitzilopochtli, Tlaloc, Quetzalcoatl. They watched the people break these sacred figures and eat them in communion, taking the divine into their bodies. And Hernán Cortés made a decision that would echo through 5 centuries. Anyone caught growing amaranth would have their hands cut off. This was not about nutrition. This was about control. And what the conquistadors understood, what we forgot, was that amaranth was more than food. It was sovereignty itself, baked into seed form. The story begins not in conquest, but in cultivation. Around 6000 BCE, somewhere in the highlands of what we now call Mexico, indigenous farmers began selecting seeds from a wild plant with deep magenta plumes. Generation by generation, they bred it for larger grains, for hardier stalks, for colors that blazed across the milpa, the traditional 3 sister gardens where corn, beans, and squash grew together. But amaranth was the 4th sister, the one we forgot. By the time the Mexica people built Tenochtitlan, amaranth had become the backbone of their agricultural system. The empire demanded it as tribute, alongside corn and beans, but often in greater quantities. 28 provinces sent it to the capital in woven baskets. Tax records from the Codex Mendoza show the empire collecting 200,000 tons of amaranth annually. This was not a supplementary crop. This was infrastructure. The Nahuatl name reveals its status, Huautli, from roots meaning the smallest seed and very strong. The paradox was intentional, something tiny that made you powerful. Warriors consumed it before battle, believing it gave them supernatural endurance, and they were not entirely wrong. Modern analysis shows amaranth contains 14 grams of protein per 100 grams, higher than wheat at 13 grams. But the crucial difference is this: amaranth protein is complete. It contains all 9 essential amino acids in ratios similar to milk protein. For a civilization without domesticated livestock beyond turkeys and dogs, this was everything. The Aztecs popped it like miniature popcorn, ground it into flour, and mixed it with honey to create a candy called alegria, joy. They toasted the seeds with chili and salt. They ate the leaves as greens, rich in iron and calcium. Nothing was wasted. The plant gave and gave. And then came the ceremonies. Here is where amaranth's fate diverged from every other crop in Mesoamerica. The Spanish could tolerate corn. It resembled European grains. They could tolerate beans, squash, tomatoes. These were merely food. But amaranth had become something else, a sacrament. During the festival of Huitzilopochtli, Aztec priests would mix toasted amaranth with agave nectar and sometimes, according to Spanish chroniclers like Bernardino de Sahagún, with sacrificial blood. They molded this mixture into effigies of gods, some as tall as a man, intricately detailed. The people would parade these through Tenochtitlan, then break them apart and consume the pieces in a ritual that looked, to Catholic eyes, like a demonic mockery of the Eucharist. The Spanish Inquisition had a word for this: tzoali. They classified it as heretical communion. Not just wrong religion, but anti-religion. The symmetry was too perfect, the resemblance too threatening. If the Aztecs had their own body of God ritual, their own way of taking divinity into the flesh, then Christianity's central mystery became just one option among many: unacceptable. Cortés understood that you could not Christianize a people who already had transubstantiation. So amaranth had to die. The ban came swiftly after the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521. Spanish authorities issued edicts throughout New Spain, and the cultivation of amaranth was forbidden under penalty of mutilation, torture, or death. Soldiers burned amaranth fields across the Valley of Mexico. Priests destroyed seed stalks. The penalty for possession wasn't just punishment. It was meant as terror, as spectacle. Your hands were cut off for the crime of feeding yourself. What wheat and barley needed, imported European grains that struggled in Mexican heat, had to replace what amaranth did naturally. The logic was economic as much as theological. Colonizers wanted crops that required annual seed purchase, that tied farmers to colonial supply chains, that made the land dependent on Spanish systems. Amaranth self-seeded. Amaranth thrived without permission. Amaranth remembered nothing of Europe. It had to be erased. But here is what the conquistadors failed to understand about seeds. They are patient conspirators. In remote villages in Oaxaca, in hidden milpas in the mountains of Puebla, in family plots scattered across regions too rugged for Spanish oversight, amaranth survived. Indigenous farmers became smugglers of their own heritage. They grew it in small patches, disguised among corn stalks. They saved seeds in ceramic jars buried in earthen floors. They passed them from mother to daughter and from father to son with whispered instructions. This is Huatli. This is what kept us alive. Do not forget. The plant itself collaborated. Amaranth is almost arrogantly resilient. It survives frost. It thrives in drought. Some varieties tolerate saline soil that would poison corn. It grows in marginal land, steep slopes, abandoned plots. When fields were burned, amaranth seeds could lie dormant in the ash for years, germinating when conditions aligned. The conquistadors could burn the fields, but not the future. For 400 years, amaranth existed in the shadows of Mexican agriculture, a folk food, a grandmother's secret, a candy sold by street vendors who did not know they were committing acts of cultural resistance. Alegria bars, those honey-sweetened clusters of popped amaranth, became fixtures of Mexican markets. Tourists bought them as curiosities. Children ate them without knowing their grandmothers' grandmothers had been threatened with mutilation for growing the grain inside. The knowledge persisted, oral and encoded, waiting. By the 1970s, the Green Revolution had transformed global agriculture. High-yield wheat and rice fed billions. But agronomists began noticing problems: monoculture vulnerability, dependence on synthetic inputs, and protein deficiencies in grain-based diets. Researchers started looking backward into the crops that industrial agriculture had left behind. In 1975, a team at the Rodale Research Center in Pennsylvania analyzed amaranth grain from seed banks. The results were startling. Not only did it have exceptional protein content, the protein was balanced, rich in lysine, the amino acid most grains lack. Feeding trials showed amaranth protein was 75% as bioavailable as milk protein, far surpassing wheat and corn. This was not a historical curiosity. This was a solution to malnutrition hiding in plain sight. Then NASA entered the picture. In their search for crops suitable for space farming, plants that could grow in confined spaces, tolerate stress, and produce high nutrition with minimal inputs, amaranth checked every box. It tolerated temperature swings, required little water, and its leaves were edible, meaning a single plant provided 2 harvests. By the 1980s, amaranth was being tested in controlled environment agriculture for future Mars colonies. The grain the Spanish had banned for being too sacred was now being studied for being too useful. Meanwhile, botanists documented amaranth's climate resilience. Studies from Mexico's International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center showed amaranth maintaining yields in heat that caused corn to fail catastrophically. While corn production dropped by 50% when temperatures exceeded 35 degrees Celsius during flowering, amaranth thrived in triple-digit heat. Its C4 photosynthetic pathway, the same mechanism that makes sugarcane and sorghum heat-tolerant, allowed it to operate efficiently even when other plants were shutting down to conserve water. The timing of this rediscovery would prove prophetic. Mexico is losing its corn. Not all at once, but in increments that compound into crisis. Climate models project that by 2080, Mexico could lose up to 33% of its corn-growing land to heat stress, drought, and shifting rainfall patterns. Corn, the crop that the Spanish insisted replace amaranth, is becoming climatically unviable in the same valleys where it was introduced 5 centuries ago. Amaranth never left those valleys. It just waited. The bitter mathematics are now impossible to ignore. Amaranth yields are comparable to rice, around 2 to 3 tons per hectare under good conditions. But unlike rice, amaranth maintains these yields with half the water. In field trials in Kenya, amaranth out-yielded maize in drought conditions by 30%. In India, where amaranth has been cultivated for millennia as Rajgira, farmers are rediscovering it as insurance against monsoon failure. The protein question has become urgent. As climate change stresses livestock production and cattle require vast amounts of water and land, plant-based complete proteins become strategic assets. Amaranth offers what soybeans do, all essential amino acids, but with one advantage. It grows where soybeans cannot, in alkaline soils and arid conditions. What the Aztecs knew empirically, we now measure precisely. What the conquistadors tried to erase has become what might save us. Today, if you walk through the markets of Oaxaca or Mexico City, you'll still find alegria vendors. But something has shifted. The candy is no longer just nostalgia. It has become a symbol of indigenous food sovereignty. Organizations like the Mixtec Seed Collective and the Zapotec Seed Network actively preserve and distribute amaranth varieties that survived the colonial ban. UC Berkeley horticulturist Kat Calloway studies these heirloom strains. She is blunt about their significance. The fact that amaranth still exists after 500 years of suppression is a big middle finger to the conquistadors. Every seed is an act of defiance. Indigenous farmers across Mexico are now being sought out by researchers who finally understand what was lost. Dona Crescencia Ramirez, a Zapotec farmer in Oaxaca, maintains 12 varieties of amaranth her family has grown for generations. When researchers from the National Autonomous University of Mexico came to catalog her seeds, they found genetic diversity that had not existed in any seed bank, traits for disease resistance, stress tolerance, and flavor profiles adapted to specific microclimates. This was not primitive agriculture. This was cutting-edge crop breeding that had continued, uninterrupted, while official agriculture looked away. The revival is not just happening in rural Mexico. In the United States, where amaranth grows wild as pigweed, a name that reveals colonial contempt, organic farmers are cultivating it as a specialty grain. In India, amaranth flour is marketed as a superfood for its protein content and gluten-free properties. In Africa, the leaves are consumed as a vegetable, providing more iron per serving than spinach. Even the genetic research has come full circle. Scientists studying amaranth's heat tolerance have identified genes that could be bred into other crops to improve drought resistance. But those genes were always there, maintained by farmers who never had labs or funding, who simply knew that this plant survived when others failed. Here is what makes amaranth's story more than historical tragedy. The Spanish did not ban it because it failed. They banned it because it succeeded too well on its own terms. It needed no church, no colony, no purchased inputs, no permission. It was the opposite of a commodity. It was a commons, reproducing itself freely, belonging to no one and everyone. This pattern repeats across colonial agriculture. Crops that persist without profit are dangerous. Foods that communities can grow, save, and share threaten the economics of control. The Green Revolution, for all its genuine achievements in preventing famine, also entrenched dependency on hybrid seeds, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticide packages. You cannot save hybrid seeds and expect the same yields next season. You must buy again. Amaranth mocks this system. It is an heirloom by nature, open-pollinated, infinitely reproducible. What the conquistadors understood, and what corporate agriculture later perfected, is that sovereignty grows from seed. Control the seed, and you control the future. Amaranth, like so many indigenous crops, refuses to be controlled. That's why it was burned. That's why it survived. That's why it matters now. We are facing the same choice the Aztecs faced. Maintain systems that depend on control, or remember plants that thrive through resilience. Mexico's corn crisis is coming. Heat waves that kill wheat are here. Water scarcity that makes rice impossible is accelerating. The crops that industrial agriculture bet everything on are becoming climate liabilities. And amaranth is still here, growing in village gardens, popping in street vendor carts, waiting in seed banks and soil memory. It never needed us to remember it. It just kept being what it always was, a plant that turns sun and heat and difficult ground into complete nutrition. When Cortés ordered the destruction of amaranth fields, when he threatened mutilation to anyone who grew it, he was trying to kill more than a crop. He was trying to kill the idea that food could be sacred, communal, and free. That people could sustain themselves without empire, without market, without permission. He survived. The grain survived. It survived in the hands of people who risked everything to keep a handful of seeds. It survived in the knowledge passed between generations. It survived in the soil itself, dormant and patient. Now, as the climate that made industrial agriculture possible begins to unravel, Amaranth's survival becomes prophecy. The grain the conquistadors banned for refusing to be controlled is the grain that might feed us through what's coming, not because we remembered it, but because it never forgot itself. Huautli, the divine food, the smallest seed that makes you strong. We cut hands off for growing it. We'll beg for it when the corn fails. The irony would be poetic if it were not so desperate. But amaranth does not care about our irony. It just keeps growing, crimson plumes blazing, 100,000 seeds per plant, complete protein in every grain, waiting for us to remember what we forgot, that abundance was always here, in the dirt, free. If only we'd been wise enough not to burn it.